The stagecoach lurched violently as gunshots echoed through the canyon, and Teresa Sinclair pressed herself against the worn leather seat, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She had left Boston 3 weeks ago with such high hopes, traveling west to become a schoolteacher in a small Arizona town where educated women were desperately needed. But now those dreams seemed ready to die in this God-forsaken mountain pass. The driver shouted something unintelligible before more shots rang out, and the horses screamed in terror as the coach ground to a shuddering halt. Teresa peered through the dusty window and saw them, at least 6 men on horseback, blocking the narrow trail ahead, their faces covered with bandanas and their weapons gleaming in the harsh September sun of 1877. "Everyone out!" a rough voice commanded, and Teresa felt her hands trembling as she gathered her skirts. The other 2 passengers, an elderly merchant and his wife, looked equally terrified as they climbed down from the coach. The mountain air was thin and cool despite the afternoon heat, and Teresa could see the vast expanse of rocky terrain stretching in every direction. They were somewhere in the mountains between Kingman, Arizona, and the smaller settlement of Cedar Springs, where she was supposed to start her new position in just 2 days. "Hand over the strong box," the leader of the Outlaws demanded, pointing his rifle at the driver. Teresa noticed the way his eyes swept over the passengers, calculating, assessing what they might be worth. Her small trunk contained nothing of value except her books and teaching supplies, but she wore her mother's silver locket, the only thing of worth she possessed and the only connection to the family she had left behind. The driver hesitated, and one of the outlaws fired a shot into the air. The elderly woman beside Teresa let out a small cry, and her husband put a protective arm around her shoulders. Teresa felt anger rising alongside her fear. These men had no right to terrorize innocent travelers, to steal what others had worked honestly to earn. But what could she do? She was alone, unarmed, and completely at their mercy. "The strong box," the leader repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. The driver began climbing down from his seat, moving toward the back of the coach where the luggage and cargo were secured. Teresa watched helplessly as the bandits closed in, their horses stamping and snorting. The canyon walls rose steeply on either side of the narrow pass, creating a natural trap. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Then she heard it, a low whistle that seemed to come from the rocks above. The outlaws tensed, several of them turning to scan the ridgeline. Teresa followed their gaze and saw a figure standing on an outcropping perhaps 30 feet above them, silhouetted against the brilliant blue sky. Even from this distance, she could tell he was massive, broad-shouldered, and tall, with long, dark hair that fell past his shoulders. He held a rifle in one hand with the casual ease of someone who knew exactly how to use it. "This pass is closed," the man called down, his voice deep and carrying easily through the thin mountain air. "I suggest you boys move along." The outlaw leader laughed, though Teresa heard the uncertainty in it. "That's mighty bold talk for one man facing 6 guns. 7, the stranger corrected, and Teresa saw movement from another position higher up the slope. "And I got 3 more up here with me, all with rifles, all with clear shots. Now I know you boys can count well enough to figure out those odds are not in your favor." Teresa held her breath. Was he bluffing? She could not see anyone else, but the outlaws were shifting nervously now, looking at each other and up at the rocks. The leader's horse danced sideways, sensing its rider's tension. "This is none of your concern, mountain man," the leader said, but his bravado was fading. "We are just conducting a little business." "Well, your business is interfering with these good people's journey, and I take exception to that." The stranger began making his way down from the rocks with a sure-footed grace that suggested he had spent his entire life in these mountains. As he drew closer, Teresa got a better look at him. He wore buckskin pants and a leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and his arms were thick with muscle. His face was weathered and tanned, with a strong jaw covered in dark stubble and eyes that were a striking shade of gray-green. He looked dangerous, like a wolf or a mountain lion, something wild and untamed that belonged to this harsh landscape. The outlaw leader raised his weapon, but the stranger was faster. His rifle came up in one smooth motion, and suddenly the leader was staring down the barrel. "I would not do that if I were you," the stranger said calmly. "My friends up there have itchy trigger fingers, and if anything happens to me, well, let us just say it would not end well for you and your boys." For a long moment, nobody moved. Teresa could hear her own breathing, quick and shallow, and the wind whistling through the rocks. Then the outlaw leader lowered his weapon. "This is not over," he said, but he was already backing his horse away. "Come on, boys, we will find easier pickings elsewhere." The bandits wheeled their horses and rode back the way they had come, disappearing around a bend in the trail. Teresa felt her knees go weak with relief, and she had to steady herself against the stagecoach. The elderly couple were embracing each other, and the driver was wiping sweat from his forehead with a shaking hand. The stranger lowered his rifle and looked around at the passengers. His eyes landed on Teresa, and she felt a strange jolt run through her, like touching something electric. "Everyone all right?" he asked. "Thanks to you," the merchant said, his voice trembling. "We owe you our lives, sir. I am Harold Mitchell, and this is my wife, Margaret." "Kade Norwood," the stranger said with a slight nod. His gaze had not left Teresa, and she felt heat rising in her cheeks. "And you, miss?" "Teresa Sinclair," she managed to say, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Norwood. That was incredibly brave." Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. Brave or foolish, depending on how you look at it. "Were there really other men up there with you?" the driver asked, scanning the rocks nervously. Cade's expression did not change. Does it matter? The threat worked, and nobody got hurt. That is what counts. So he had been bluffing, Teresa realized. He had faced down 6 armed outlaws alone, with nothing but his confidence and his rifle. That was either the bravest or most reckless thing she had ever witnessed. "The problem is," Kade continued, "those boys are going to figure out pretty quickly that I was alone, and they might decide to come back. This pass is not safe, not for a stagecoach full of passengers and cargo." "But it is the only route to Cedar Springs," the driver protested. "We cannot turn back to Kingman now. We are behind schedule as it is." "There is another way," Kade said slowly, as if considering whether to share this information. "An old trail that runs through the high country. It is rough going, too rough for a stagecoach, but you could make it on horseback if you are willing." The driver shook his head. "I cannot abandon the coach. The company would have my hide." "Then take the Mitchells back to Kingman," Kade said. "The lady here," he nodded toward Teresa, "needs to get to Cedar Springs. I will take her through the high trail. We will make better time on horseback anyway, and those outlaws will not be expecting anyone to use that route." Teresa felt her stomach drop. Travel alone through the mountains with a complete stranger. It went against every rule of propriety she had been raised with, but what choice did she have? She needed to reach Cedar Springs, and she had no doubt that the outlaws would return to this pass, probably with reinforcements. "I do not know," she said hesitantly. I appreciate your offer, but I do not know you, Mr. Norwood." His eyes met hers, and she saw understanding there, along with something that might have been respect. "Fair enough, but I give you my word that I will see you safely to Cedar Springs with your honor intact. I have a sister about your age, and I would hope someone would help her if she found herself in a similar situation." There was sincerity in his voice that Teresa found herself wanting to believe. Besides, what other option did she have? The Mitchells were too elderly to attempt a difficult mountain trail, and the driver had his responsibilities to the stage company. "How long would the journey take?" she asked. "If we leave now and ride through till dusk, we can make a good camp tonight and reach Cedar Springs by tomorrow afternoon. It is actually faster than going by stagecoach, since the regular route has to wind through all the lower passes." The driver looked at Teresa with concern. "Miss Sinclair, I do not feel right about this. Maybe you should come back to Kingman with us and wait for another stage in a few days." But Teresa thought of the school waiting for her, the children who needed a teacher, the opportunity she had traveled so far to pursue. She had not come all this way to turn back at the first sign of trouble. "No," she said, straightening her shoulders. "I will go with Mr. Norwood. Can we take one of the stage horses?" "Take 2, the driver said. "You will need a pack animal for your trunk and supplies." He began unhitching horses from the team, selecting 2 sturdy-looking animals. Kade helped him prepare saddles and rigging, moving with efficient competence. Teresa watched the way his muscles flexed under his shirt as he worked, the easy strength in his movements. She had never seen a man quite like him. The men she had known in Boston were refined, educated, soft-handed. Kade Norwood was something else entirely, something raw and powerful and more than a little intimidating. Within 20 minutes, they were ready to depart. Teresa's small trunk was secured on the pack horse, along with supplies the driver insisted they take, including blankets, food, and extra water. The Mitchells wished them safe travels, and the driver gave Kade detailed directions to deliver a message to the stage company office in Cedar Springs. "Stay close to me," Kade said as he helped Teresa mount her horse. His hands were gentle despite their obvious strength, and Teresa felt that strange electric sensation again where he touched her waist. "The trail gets narrow in places, and there are some steep sections. Your horse is sure-footed, but pay attention." "I will," Teresa promised, gathering the reins. She had ridden before, though not extensively, and certainly not in terrain like this, but she had always been a quick learner, and fear had a way of sharpening one's focus. Kade swung onto his own horse with fluid ease and took the pack horse's lead rope. "Follow me," he said, and guided his mount off the main trail toward what looked like nothing more than a crack between two massive boulders. As they drew closer, Teresa saw that it was actually the beginning of a narrow path that wound up the mountainside, barely wide enough for a single horse. The stagecoach and its remaining passengers disappeared from view as they climbed higher into the rocks. The afternoon sun beat down on Teresa's shoulders, and she was grateful for her wide-brimmed traveling hat. The trail switched back and forth across the face of the mountain, gaining elevation rapidly. Teresa focused on following Kade's lead, trusting her horse to pick its way over the rocky ground. They had been riding for perhaps an hour when Kade raised his hand and brought them to a halt. He was looking back the way they had come, his eyes narrowed. "What is it?" Teresa asked, keeping her voice low. "Riders on the main pass," he said quietly. "Looks like those outlaws came back, just like I figured. But they cannot follow us up here, not with the route we are taking. We are safe enough now." The tension in Teresa's shoulders eased slightly. She looked around at the vast landscape spreading out below them. From this height, she could see for miles, the rugged mountains giving way to rolling hills and distant flatlands. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, so different from the green forests and gentle countryside of New England. "You know these mountains well," she observed. Kade nodded, urging his horse forward again. "Been living up here for about 8 years now. I have a cabin near Cedar Springs, do some trapping and hunting, guide occasionally when folks need it. These mountains are home to me now." "You are not originally from Arizona?" Teresa asked, curious despite herself. "Colorado originally, the San Juan Mountains. My family had a ranch up there." He fell silent, and Teresa sensed there was a story behind his presence here, perhaps not an entirely happy one. She did not press him. They were strangers, after all, and he was already doing far more for her than she had any right to expect. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the clopping of hooves on stone and the whisper of wind through the rocks. The trail climbed even higher, and Teresa could feel the air growing thinner and cooler. She was glad for her traveling coat, even though she had been uncomfortably warm earlier. "Tell me about your sister," Teresa said eventually, wanting to hear his voice again. There was something comforting about it, deep and steady and somehow reassuring. Kade glanced back at her, and she saw his expression soften. "Emily. She's 19 now, married to a good man who runs a freight business out of Denver, stubborn as a mule, smart as a whip, and has a heart bigger than the whole territory. She was always getting into trouble when we were kids, and I was always pulling her out of it." He paused. "She is one of the reasons I could not let those outlaws hurt you folks. I kept thinking, what if that was Emily, traveling alone and afraid? I would want someone to help her." Teresa felt warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. "She is lucky to have a brother like you." "I am the lucky one. She saved my life in a way after everything fell apart in Colorado. But that is a long story, and not one I'm inclined to tell right now." His tone was not unkind, just final, and Teresa understood that she had touched on something painful. I understand," she said softly. "We all have things we would rather not talk about." He looked at her again, longer this time, and she saw curiosity in his eyes. "What brings a proper Boston lady out to the wilds of Arizona territory? You do not strike me as the adventurous type." Teresa felt a smile tugging at her lips despite everything. "Shows what you know, Mr. Norwood. I have accepted a position as a schoolteacher in Cedar Springs. They were advertising for educated teachers back east, offering good salaries and the chance to make a real difference. I applied, was accepted, and here I am. All by yourself? No family, no husband? My parents passed away 2 years ago, Teresa said, and was pleased that her voice did not waver. Yellow fever. I have no siblings, no close relatives. Teaching in Boston was fine, but I wanted something more, something that mattered. Out here, children have so few opportunities for education. I can actually make a difference in their lives. Kade nodded slowly. That is brave. Most women would not leave everything familiar behind to travel thousands of miles to a frontier town. Maybe I am brave, or maybe I'm just running away, Teresa said honestly. Everything in Boston reminded me of my parents, of the life we had. I needed a fresh start, a new beginning somewhere they had never been. Nothing wrong with starting over, Kade said. I did the same thing myself. He pointed ahead to where the trail widened slightly into a small plateau. We will rest here for a bit, let the horses catch their breath. It is a hard climb, and we still have several hours of riding ahead. They dismounted, and Teresa stretched her legs, feeling the stiffness from hours in the saddle. Kade pulled out a canteen and offered it to her. Drink, he said. The altitude can dehydrate you fast, and you need to stay sharp. The water was cool and refreshing, and Teresa drank gratefully. She watched as Kade checked the horses, running his hands over their legs and examining their hooves with practiced efficiency. He moved with the confidence of someone completely at ease in this environment, and Teresa found herself fascinated by him. He was so different from anyone she had ever known, rough and weathered, but with a gentleness in the way he handled the animals and a consideration in the way he treated her. How much farther to where we will camp tonight? She asked. Another 3, maybe 4 hours, Kade replied, straightening up from examining the pack horse. There's a good spot, I know, sheltered from the wind with a spring for fresh water. We will be comfortable enough there. He looked at her appraisingly. How are you holding up? This is rough country for someone who is not used to it. I am managing, Teresa said, lifting her chin. She was determined not to be a burden, not to be the helpless female who needed constant assistance. I may be from Boston, but I am not made of porcelain, Mr. Norwood. A slow grin spread across his face, transforming his features and making him look younger, less weathered. I can see that, Miss Sinclair. Most women would have been weeping hysterically by now, what with the outlaws and the rough trail and all. You have got spine. I respect that. The compliment warmed her more than it probably should have. Thank you, she said simply. They remounted and continued on, the trail now following the spine of a ridge with dizzying drops on either side. Teresa tried not to look down, focusing instead on Kade's broad back ahead of her. He rode with easy grace, moving with his horse rather than against it, and she found herself trying to imitate his posture. The sun was sliding toward the western horizon when the terrain began to change, becoming slightly less rocky and showing patches of scrubby vegetation. They were still high in the mountains, but the trail was descending gradually into a series of small valleys. Kade led them through a narrow defile between 2 rock faces and emerged into a sheltered bowl perhaps 100 yards across. A spring bubbled up from between the rocks on one side, creating a small pool before the water disappeared into the ground. There were even a few stunted trees, their twisted branches evidence of harsh winters and constant wind. Here we are, Kade announced, dismounting. Home for tonight? He helped Teresa down, his hands strong and sure on her waist. She felt the warmth of him through her clothing and was suddenly aware of how alone they were, how isolated. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw only respect and a quiet kindness that eased her concerns. What can I do to help? She asked, determined to be useful. You can gather some of that dried brush for a fire while I unsaddle the horses and set up camp, Kade said. Stay within sight of me, though. There are mountain lions in these parts, and they sometimes hunt at dusk. Teresa felt a shiver run down her spine that had nothing to do with the cooling air. She had not even considered wild animals, but she nodded and began collecting the brittle brush that grew in scattered clumps around the basin. Kade worked quickly, removing the saddles and rubbing down each horse before hobbling them near the spring where they could drink and graze on the sparse grass. By the time Teresa had gathered an armful of kindling, Kade had built a ring of stones for a fire and was pulling supplies from the pack. He took the brush from her and expertly arranged it with larger pieces of wood he must have brought with them. Within minutes, he had a cheerful fire crackling, pushing back the gathering darkness. You make that look easy, Teresa observed, sitting down on a flat rock near the flames. The heat felt wonderful after the chill of the evening air. Practice, Kade said with a shrug. When you spend as much time in the wilderness as I do, you learn what you need to survive. Fire, water, shelter, food. Get those 4 things right, and you will be fine in just about any situation. He handed her a piece of dried meat and some hard biscuits. Not fancy, but it will keep your strength up. They ate in companionable silence, and Teresa found herself more relaxed than she had been since leaving the stagecoach. There was something peaceful about this place, isolated and wild though it was. The stars were beginning to appear overhead, more stars than she had ever seen in her life, spreading across the sky in a glittering carpet. "It is beautiful," she breathed, tipping her head back to take it all in. Kade followed her gaze upward. "That's one thing about the mountains. Nothing between you and the sky. Makes you realize how small we are, how much bigger the world is than our little problems. Is that why you live up here? To escape your problems?" He was quiet for so long that Teresa thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Partly. After my parents died and the ranch was sold to pay debts, I did not know what to do with myself. My brother took over the family business, Emily got married, and I was just drifting. I headed south, ended up in Arizona, and found these mountains. Something about them spoke to me, made me feel like I belonged, so I stayed. Do you ever get lonely?" "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I go into Cedar Springs or Kingman every few weeks for supplies, talk to folks, catch up on news, and I have friends among the Yavapai people who live in these mountains. They have taught me a lot about surviving out here, about respecting the land." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "What about you? You must have left friends behind in Boston." "A few," Teresa said, "but most people I knew were my parents' friends, not really mine. After they died, I realized how isolated I had been, how much of my life had revolved around caring for them and teaching at the same school where my mother had taught. Coming out here is the first thing I have ever done that was entirely my own choice." "And how does it feel?" Teresa considered the question. "Terrifying," she said honestly, "but also exhilarating, like I'm finally living instead of just existing." She looked at him across the fire. "Does that make sense?" "More than you know," Kade said softly, and their eyes met and held. Teresa felt that electric sensation again, stronger now, like something important was happening, though she could not quite name what it was. Kade broke the eye contact first, standing abruptly. "I will get your bedroll set up. You should get some sleep. We have a long ride tomorrow." He arranged blankets near the fire, but not too close, creating a comfortable sleeping area for her. "I will be over there," he said, pointing to the other side of the fire. "If you need anything during the night, just call out, and do not wander off. Like I said, mountain lions." "I will stay right here," Teresa promised. She was exhausted anyway, bone-deep tired from the fear and stress of the day and the hours of riding. She removed her boots and lay down on the bedroll, pulling the blankets up to her chin. The ground was harder than any bed she had ever slept in, but the blankets were warm and the fire was comforting. She watched Kade settle on the other side of the flames, his rifle within easy reach. He sat with his back against a boulder, keeping watch over the camp and the horses. Teresa felt safe with him there, safer than she had felt in a long time. It was strange to trust someone she had just met so completely, but something about Kade Norwood inspired confidence. He was exactly what he appeared to be. No pretense, no false charm, just solid competence and quiet strength. "Mr. Norwood?" she said sleepily. "Kade," he corrected. "Out here, we do not stand much on formality." "Kade," she repeated, liking the way his name felt in her mouth. "Thank you for everything, for saving us from those outlaws, for taking me through the mountains, for treating me with respect. I know this is not what you planned to do with your day." "Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we do not plan," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her pulse quicken. "Sleep now, Teresa. Tomorrow is a new day." She closed her eyes, listening to the crackle of the fire and the soft sounds of the horses moving nearby. The last thing she was aware of before sleep claimed her was Kade's presence, steady and protective, watching over her through the mountain night. Teresa woke to the smell of coffee and the pale light of dawn. For a moment she was disoriented, uncertain of where she was, Then memory flooded back and she sat up quickly. Kade was crouched by the fire, heating a small pot of coffee over the flames. He looked up as she stirred and offered a slight smile. "Morning," he said. "Hope you slept all right." "Better than I expected," Teresa admitted, stretching stiff muscles. "What time is it?" "About an hour past sunrise. I let you sleep a bit. You needed the rest." He poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "It is strong, but it will wake you up." Teresa took a grateful sip and nearly choked. The coffee was indeed strong, bitter and thick, but the warmth and caffeine were welcome. "Thank you," she managed. Kade grinned. "Mountain coffee takes some getting used to." He handed her more of the dried meat and biscuits. "Eat quick. I want to get moving soon. The sooner we get you to Cedar Springs, the sooner you can start your new life." They broke camp efficiently, and within half an hour were back on the trail. The morning air was crisp and cool, and Teresa could see her breath in small clouds. But as the sun climbed higher, the temperature rose rapidly. The trail continued to descend, winding through valleys and crossing several small streams. The landscape was changing, becoming less harsh, with more vegetation and signs of wildlife. "We are getting close to the lower elevations," Kade explained. "Another few hours and we will be able to see Cedar Springs in the valley below." They rode steadily through the morning, and Teresa found herself watching Kade more than the scenery. The way he sat his horse, the way he scanned the terrain constantly, alert for any signs of danger. The play of muscles in his arms and shoulders, the strong line of his jaw, and the weathered, handsome features. She had never been particularly interested in men before, too focused on her duties and her grief. But there was something about Kade that drew her attention, that made her aware of herself as a woman in a way she had not experienced before. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a quick meal. Kade pointed to a gap between two distant peaks. "There," he said. "That is where Cedar Springs sits. You can just barely see the buildings if you look close." Teresa shaded her eyes and squinted, and there, tiny in the distance, she could make out the regular shapes of man-made structures. Her new home. Excitement and nervousness warred in her chest. This was it, the beginning of her new life, the fresh start she had traveled so far to find. "Tell me about the town," she said. "What is it like?" Kade considered. "Small, maybe 300 people. Mostly miners and ranchers, some families, a few businesses. There's a general store, a saloon, a church, a boarding house, where you will probably stay until you find more permanent lodging. The people are decent, hard-working folks. They will appreciate having a real teacher for their children." "Have they had a school before?" "Off and on. The last teacher was an older man who passed away last spring. Since then, various people have tried to teach the children, but no one with real training. You will be a welcome addition to the community, Teresa. They need you." The thought was both comforting and daunting. So much responsibility, so many expectations. But that was exactly what she wanted, was it not? A chance to matter, to make a real difference. They remounted and continued on, the trail now wide enough that they could ride side by side. Teresa found herself telling Kade about her plans for the school, the books she had brought, the teaching methods she wanted to try. He listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions, and she realized he was more educated than his rough appearance might suggest. He spoke well, used proper grammar, and clearly had knowledge beyond just survival skills. "You could have been anything," she said impulsively. "Why choose to live alone in the mountains?" Kade was silent for a moment. "Because alone is safe," he finally said. "When you care about people, when you let them into your heart, you give them the power to hurt you. And I had enough hurt to last a lifetime." He glanced at her. "Not talking about my parents dying, though that was hard enough. There was a woman in Colorado before everything fell apart. I thought she loved me, thought we would build a life together. Turns out she loved my family's money more than she loved me. When the ranch was sold and I had nothing, she made it clear I was no longer of interest to her." Teresa felt anger on his behalf. Then she was a fool. Money comes and goes, but a good man is hard to find. He looked at her with surprise and something that might have been pleasure. "That is a kind thing to say. It is a true thing to say. You saved my life yesterday, Kade. You faced down armed outlaws for people you did not even know, and you are going miles out of your way to help me reach Cedar Springs safely. That is the measure of a man's character, not how much money he has in the bank. You are not what I expected, Kade said softly. When I saw you step out of that stagecoach yesterday, all proper and refined in your traveling dress, I figured you were just another Eastern lady who would look down on folks like me. But you have got real substance, Teresa Sinclair. Real heart. She felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she met his eyes steadily. And you are not what I expected either. I thought mountain men were supposed to be rough and crude, but you have been nothing but a gentleman who happens to be very good with a rifle. He laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face. I reckon I can be both. Depends on what the situation calls for. They fell into an easy conversation as they rode, sharing stories about their lives, their hopes, their dreams. Teresa found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone else, and he seemed equally willing to share pieces of himself. The walls he had built around his heart were high and thick, but she could sense them lowering, at least a little, as they talked. By mid-afternoon, they had descended to the valley floor and could see Cedar Springs clearly ahead. It was indeed small, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street, with scattered houses and ranches spreading out into the surrounding countryside. Mountains rose on all sides, creating a natural basin that offered some protection from the elements. As they rode into town, people stopped to stare. Teresa was conscious of how she must look, dusty and disheveled from 2 days of travel, riding alongside a buckskin-clad mountain man. But Kade seemed unconcerned by the attention, nodding to people he recognized as they made their way down the main street. He stopped in front of a tidy 2-story building with a sign that read, Morrison's Boarding House. "This is where you will want to stay," he said, dismounting and coming around to help her down. His hands on her waist sent that now familiar electric sensation through her, and she found herself reluctant to step away from him. Thank you," she said, looking up into his gray-green eyes, "for everything. I do not know how I can ever repay you." "No repayment needed," Kade said. "I was glad to help." But he did not release her immediately, and she saw something in his expression, a longing perhaps, a reluctance to let her go. "I come into town every couple of weeks for supplies," he said. "Maybe I could stop by, see how you're settling in?" "I would like that," Teresa said, her heart beating faster. "I would like that very much." A woman emerged from the boarding house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 50, plump and cheerful looking, with graying hair pulled back in a bun. "Goodness, is this our new teacher? We were not expecting you for another day or so. What happened?" Kade released Teresa and stepped back. "There was some trouble with Outlaws on the main pass. I brought Miss Sinclair through the high trail to keep her safe." The woman's eyes went wide. "Outlaws? Mercy! You poor dear, you must be exhausted. I am Harriet Morrison, and you are very welcome here. Come inside, let me get you settled." Teresa allowed herself to be ushered toward the door, but she looked back at Kade. He was already swinging back onto his horse, preparing to leave. "Kade!" she called out, and he turned. "Thank you," she said again, "for everything." He touched the brim of his hat in a kind of salute. "My pleasure, Miss Teresa. I will see you soon." Then he wheeled his horse and rode back down the street, leading the pack horse behind him. Teresa watched until he disappeared from view, feeling an unexpected ache in her chest. "That Kade Norwood is a good man," Harriet said, watching Teresa's face with knowing eyes. "Keeps to himself mostly, but he will help anyone who needs it. You were lucky he was there when trouble found you." "Yes," Teresa agreed softly. "I was very lucky indeed." The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Teresa met with the town council, inspected the small schoolhouse that would be her domain, and began preparing lessons for the diverse group of children who would be her students. The people of Cedar Springs welcomed her warmly, grateful to have an educated teacher for their children at last. She moved into a small room at the boarding house, clean and comfortable, if not particularly spacious. Harriet Morrison proved to be a motherly presence, making sure Teresa ate properly and did not work herself to exhaustion. The other boarders were friendly, including a young couple who ran the general store and an elderly gentleman who played piano at the saloon. But despite the activity and the new friendships forming, Teresa found her thoughts returning again and again to Kade. She remembered the way he had looked at her in the firelight, the sound of his laugh, the strength in his hands, and the gentleness in his eyes. She told herself it was foolish to develop feelings for a man she had known for less than 2 days, but her heart did not seem to care about logic or propriety. The school opened on a Monday morning in late September, and Teresa found herself facing 12 students ranging in age from 6 to 14. They were a rough and tumble group, clearly unused to formal education, but their eagerness to learn touched her heart. She threw herself into teaching with all her energy, determined to give these children the best education she could provide. Days turned into a week, then 2, and still Kade did not appear. Teresa tried not to be disappointed, tried to tell herself that he had probably forgotten about his promise to check on her. But every time she heard hoofbeats on the street, her heart would leap, and every time it proved to be someone else, she felt the sting of letdown. On a Saturday afternoon in early October, Teresa was in the schoolhouse organizing supplies when she heard the door open behind her. She turned, expecting to see one of the students or their parents, and instead found Kade standing in the doorway. He had cleaned up since she last saw him, his hair tied back and his clothes less worn, but he was still unmistakably himself, tall and broad and solid. "Kade," she breathed, and the smile that spread across her face was entirely involuntary. "You came." "I said I would," he replied, stepping inside and looking around the schoolroom with interest. "Sorry it took so long. I had some traps to check up in the high country, and then I got caught in that storm that blew through last week. But I have been thinking about you, wondering how you were getting on." "I have been thinking about you too," Teresa admitted, then felt her cheeks heat at the boldness of the statement. But Kade smiled, a slow, warm smile that made her knees weak. "That's good to hear," he said, "because I was thinking maybe you would like to have dinner with me tonight. There's a decent restaurant here in town, or if you would rather, I could cook something at my cabin. It is only about an hour's ride from here." Teresa knew she should be cautious, should not spend time alone with him at his cabin where anything could happen and no one would know. But she also knew with absolute certainty that she wanted to see where he lived, to spend more time with him, to explore these feelings that had been growing in her heart for 2 weeks. "I would love to see your cabin," she said. "Let me just finish here and get my coat." They rode out of town together, and Teresa was aware of curious eyes watching them. She would likely face questions from Harriet and others when she returned, but she found she did not care. For the first time in her life, she was following her heart instead of the rules of propriety, and it felt wonderful and terrifying at the same time. Kade's cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by pine trees, with a clear stream running nearby. It was larger than Teresa expected, solidly built of logs with a stone chimney and a wide porch. The setting was beautiful, peaceful in a way that the town could never be. "You built this yourself?" she asked as they dismounted. "Most of it," Kade confirmed. "I bought the land from the territorial government and then spent the better part of a year getting everything just right. It is not fancy, but it is home." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly cozy. There was a main room with a fireplace, a table and chairs, and a comfortable-looking bed covered with a colorful quilt. Shelves lined one wall, filled with books that surprised Teresa. She moved closer to read the titles and found everything from Shakespeare to treatises on natural philosophy. "You are a reader," she said with delight. "I may live in the wilderness, but that does not mean I want to be ignorant," Kade said, moving to the fireplace to build up the fire. "Books connect me to the wider world, keep my mind sharp. Besides, long winter nights need something to fill them." Teresa pulled down a volume of poetry and found it well thumbed, with notes in the margins. "You have studied these carefully." "I like poetry," Kade said with a slightly defensive tone. "Is that so strange?" "Not strange at all," Teresa assured him, "just unexpected and wonderful. I love poetry, too. It was one of my father's passions, and he raised me to appreciate it." They talked about books and poetry while Kade prepared a simple meal of venison stew and fresh bread. Teresa helped, and they moved around the cabin with an ease that suggested far more familiarity than they actually had. It felt natural being here with him, felt right in a way that nothing else in her life had felt for a very long time. Over dinner, they continued their conversations from the trail, but now there was an undercurrent of something deeper, a tension that was not quite uncomfortable, but definitely present. Teresa was intensely aware of Kade across the table from her, the way the firelight played across his features, the way his eyes seemed to darken when he looked at her. "I have been lonely," she found herself saying. though she had not meant to be quite so honest. Even surrounded by people in town, I have been lonely. Because none of them know me, not really. They see the teacher, the proper Boston lady, but they do not see Teresa. I see you, Kade said quietly. I saw you that first day on the trail, standing up to your fear, refusing to fall apart even though you had every right to. I saw your courage and your strength, and I have not been able to stop thinking about you since. Teresa felt her breath catch. I have not stopped thinking about you either. You are in my thoughts when I wake up and when I go to sleep. I tell myself it is foolish, that I barely know you, but my heart does not seem to care about logic. Kade pushed back from the table and stood, moving to her side. He held out his hand, and Teresa took it without hesitation, letting him pull her to her feet. They stood close, not quite touching, and the air between them seemed charged with possibility. I want to kiss you, Kade said, his voice rough, but I need to know it is what you want too. Because once I start, Teresa, I do not know if I will be able to stop. In answer, she rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. For a moment, he stood frozen, as if shocked by her boldness. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and he was kissing her back with a hunger that matched her own. His mouth was warm and demanding, and Teresa felt like she was drowning in sensation, in the taste and feel and scent of him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kade rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that since I first saw you, he admitted, and it was even better than I imagined. For me too, Teresa whispered. Kade, I know this is fast, I know we should be more careful, but I have never felt like this before, never wanted anyone the way I want you. I'm not a wealthy man, Kade said, pulling back slightly to look into her eyes. I cannot give you the life you would have had in Boston, the fine things in the society. All I have is this cabin, this land, and whatever I can trap or hunt or guide. It is a hard life in many ways. I do not care about wealth, Teresa said fiercely. I had wealth in Boston, and it meant nothing without love, without connection. I want this. Kade, I want you. I want the life we could build together. You're supposed to be a teacher. I can still teach. Cedar Springs is not so far that I could not ride in during the week and return here on weekends. Or maybe eventually we could build a house closer to town. We will figure it out together if you want this as much as I do. I want it, Kade said, and kissed her again, slower this time, thorough and deep. I want you, Teresa. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to build a life with you, raise children with you, grow old with you. Then that is what we will do, Teresa said simply. But first we need to get to know each other properly, court each other the way people do, even if we are doing it a bit out of order. Kade laughed, the sound full of joy and relief. That seems wise, though it is going to be damned hard to be proper and gentlemanly when all I want to do is keep kissing you. Then kiss me, Teresa said. We can worry about propriety tomorrow. They spent the rest of the evening talking and kissing, and Teresa felt herself falling deeper in love with every passing moment. Kade was everything she had never known she wanted, strong and gentle, educated and practical, wounded, but not broken. He understood her in a way no one else ever had, saw through the polished exterior to the real woman underneath. When full dark had fallen, Kade insisted on riding her back to town, even though she protested that it was a long ride for him. I am not letting you ride alone in the dark, he said firmly. Mountain lions, remember, and bandits, and 100 other dangers. Besides, I want every minute with you that I can get. They rode slowly through the moonlit landscape, Kade pointing out constellations and sharing stories about his time in the mountains. When they reached Cedar Springs, he helped her down from her horse and kissed her one more time, long and sweet. When can I see you again? He asked. Tomorrow? Teresa suggested. We could go for a ride, maybe have a picnic. Tomorrow it is, Kade agreed. I will come by around noon. He watched until she was safely inside the boarding house before riding away, and Teresa stood at the window of her room, watching his silhouette disappear into the night. Harriet cornered her the next morning at breakfast. So, the older woman said with a knowing smile, you and Kade Norwood seem to have become quite friendly. Teresa felt herself blushing but refused to be embarrassed. He is a good man, and yes, we are becoming close. I hope that is not a problem. Problem? Goodness, no, child. I think it is wonderful. Kade has been alone too long, and you have had too much sorrow in your young life. You deserve some happiness, both of you. Harriet patted her hand. Just be careful. The heart is a precious thing, and once given, it is not easily taken back. I know, Teresa said softly, but I think my heart made its choice the moment I met him. True to his word, Kade appeared at noon, and they spent a glorious afternoon riding through the countryside. He showed her places of beauty she never would have found on her own, a hidden waterfall, a meadow full of wildflowers despite the lateness of the season, an overlook with views that stretched for miles. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's quirks and preferences, sharing dreams and fears. Teresa told him about her hopes for the school, her plans to start a library for the town. Kade shared his idea of expanding his land, maybe running some cattle, creating something lasting. Would you want children? Teresa asked, then felt her cheeks heat at her own boldness. But it was an important question, one that needed asking if they were truly considering a future together. I would, Kade said seriously. I would like a house full of them, sons and daughters to teach and raise and watch grow. What about you? The same, Teresa admitted. I've always wanted a family, a real family of my own. That is part of why I became a teacher, I think. To be surrounded by children, even if they were not mine. They could be yours, Kade said. Ours. If you will have me, Teresa, I know we have not known each other long, but I know my own heart. I love you. I want to marry you, if you will say yes. Teresa felt tears stinging her eyes. It has only been a few weeks. I know, and if you want to wait, if you need more time to be sure, I will wait. I will wait forever if I have to. But I know what I want. And what I want is you. Teresa looked at this man who had crashed into her life so unexpectedly, who had saved her and protected her and shown her what it meant to be truly seen and valued. She thought about the life they could build together, the love they could share. And she knew with absolute certainty that waiting would change nothing, because her heart had already made its choice. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you, Kade Norwood. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. The joy on his face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, and Teresa felt like her heart might burst with happiness. This was not what she had planned when she left Boston, but it was so much better than anything she could have imagined. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Cedar Springs, with half the town in attendance. Teresa wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and Kade had gotten a proper suit coat for the occasion, though he looked slightly uncomfortable in it. Harriet wept happy tears throughout the ceremony, and even the town sheriff, a gruff man named Patterson, admitted it was a fine wedding. The townspeople had pitched in to furnish a small house on the edge of town, a compromise that would allow Teresa to continue teaching while being close to Kade's cabin in the mountains. It was perfect, exactly what they needed to start their life together. That first night as husband and wife, Kade carried Teresa over the threshold of their new home, and they came together with a passion and tenderness that took her breath away. He was gentle with her, patient and loving, and Teresa felt cherished in a way she had never experienced before. They fit together perfectly, bodies and hearts and souls, and when they finally lay spent and satisfied in each other's arms, Teresa knew she had found her home. The months that followed were the happiest of Teresa's life. She taught during the week, nurturing young minds and watching them blossom under her guidance. On weekends, she and Kade would ride out to his cabin, spending quiet time together away from the demands of town. He taught her to shoot a rifle, to track game, to read the signs of weather in the mountains. She taught him poetry and philosophy, and they would spend hours reading aloud to each other by the fireplace. Winter came, harsh and cold, and Teresa was grateful for Kade's expertise. He kept them warm and fed even when snow piled high around their house. They spent long evenings wrapped in blankets, talking and dreaming and making love while the wind howled outside. It was during one of those cold January nights that Teresa realized her monthly courses had not come, and a growing suspicion took root in her mind. She waited another week to be certain before telling Kade. They were sitting by the fire one evening when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "I think we are going to have a baby," she said softly. The expression on his face was everything she could have hoped for. Shock, followed by wonder, then pure, unfiltered joy. "Truly?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. I'm almost certain. The signs are all there. We are going to be parents, Kade. He pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. A baby, he whispered. Our baby. Teresa, I never thought I could be this happy. I never thought I deserved it. You deserve all the happiness in the world, Teresa said, pulling back to look into his eyes. You are the best man I have ever known, and you are going to be an amazing father. The pregnancy was not easy. Teresa suffered from sickness in the early months, and Kade hovered over her anxiously, bringing her water and dry crackers, holding her hair when she was ill, doing everything he could to ease her discomfort. As she grew larger, he insisted she stop riding to the cabin, afraid the rough journey might harm the baby. He was overprotective and fussy, and Teresa loved him all the more for it. Summer arrived, hot and dry, and Teresa found the heat oppressive in her condition. Kade brought her cool water from the spring, fanned her with a palm leaf he had somehow acquired, and rubbed her aching back and swollen feet. The women of the town rallied around her, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and promises to help when the time came. In late August, as monsoon clouds gathered over the mountains, Teresa's labor began. It was long and hard, and there were moments when she feared something was wrong. But Kade never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, telling her how strong she was, how much he loved her. And finally, after nearly 20 hours of struggle, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the small house with sound. A boy, the midwife announced, placing the squirming bundle on Teresa's chest. A big, healthy boy. Teresa looked down at her son through tears of exhaustion and joy. He had Kade's dark hair and a strong cry that suggested he had inherited his father's spirit. Kade was weeping openly, running a gentle finger down their son's tiny cheek. What should we name him? Teresa asked. I was thinking James, Kade said, after your father, if that's all right with you. Teresa felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. That is perfect. James Norwood. Welcome to the world, little one. Those first weeks with baby James were exhausting and wonderful. Teresa had taken a leave from teaching, and they moved out to the cabin for a while, wanting the peace and quiet of the mountains while they adjusted to parenthood. Kade proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle despite his size and strength. He would walk the floor with James when the baby fussed, singing soft songs in a surprisingly good voice. As James grew from a tiny infant into a sturdy toddler, Teresa watched Kade blossom into the man she had always known he could be. The shadows that had haunted his eyes when they first met were gone, replaced by contentment and purpose. He was building something lasting now, not just surviving, but truly living. When James was 2, they added a daughter, whom they named Emma after Kade's mother. She had her father's gray-green eyes and her mother's quick mind, and from the start, she had both of them wrapped around her tiny finger. Kade was just as devoted to his daughter as he had been to his son, rocking her to sleep and playing tea party with her when she was old enough. The town of Cedar Springs grew, and with it, the school. Teresa hired an assistant teacher, a young woman from California, who had the same passion for education that Teresa did. This allowed Teresa to spend more time with her growing family while still contributing to the community she loved. 3 years after Emma came another son, whom they named Samuel. He was quieter than his siblings, thoughtful and observant, and Kade said he reminded him of his own father. The cabin in the mountains was expanded to accommodate their growing family, and they split their time between town and the wilderness, giving their children the best of both worlds. On a warm evening in September, nearly 7 years after that fateful day when Outlaws had blocked the Stagecoach pass, Teresa sat on the porch of their mountain cabin watching the sunset. Kade sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, while their 3 children played in the clearing. James, now 6, was showing Emma how to skip stones in the stream, while 4-year-old Samuel watched with serious concentration. "Do you ever miss Boston?" Kade asked, not for the first time. It was a question he returned to occasionally, as if he still could not quite believe she had chosen this life over the comfort and refinement she had known. "Never," Teresa said firmly, snuggling closer to his warmth. "This is where I belong. With you, with our children, in this place we have built together. Boston was a lifetime ago, a different person's life." "I am glad," Kade said, pressing a kiss to her temple, "because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You saved me, Teresa. I was just existing before you came along, going through the motions of living without really feeling anything. You taught me how to feel again, how to hope, how to love. We saved each other, Teresa corrected. I was running away from grief and loneliness, and you showed me that I could have a future worth living, that I could have love and family and purpose. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children in the mountains beyond. A hawk circled overhead, riding the evening thermals, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. This land was still wild and sometimes dangerous, but it was home in a way no other place had ever been. "Mama, Papa, come look," Emma called, her voice high with excitement. "James caught a fish." They rose and walked down to the stream where James was proudly holding up a small trout, his face glowing with achievement. Kade praised his son's fishing skills and showed him how to release the fish back into the water, explaining the importance of only taking what they needed. Samuel crouched by the water's edge, watching the fish swim away with wide, wondering eyes. That night, after the children were asleep in their loft, Teresa and Kade lay in their bed, wrapped in each other's arms. The window was open, letting in the cool mountain breeze and the sound of the stream. A full moon painted everything in silver light. "I am pregnant again," Teresa said softly, sharing the news she had been certain of for a few days now. "We are going to have another baby in the spring." Kade's arms tightened around her. "Another one?" "Teresa, you're going to give me a whole tribe of children." "Is that a problem?" she asked, hearing the smile in his voice. "Not even a little bit," he assured her. "I love our family, and I love that we keep adding to it. Boy or girl, it does not matter. I will love this child just as much as I love the others." "And me?" Teresa teased. "Do you still love me?" "More than life itself," Kade said seriously, rolling to face her in the moonlight. "More with every day that passes. You are my heart, Teresa, my home, my everything." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude and joy into that connection. They made love slowly, tenderly, celebrating the life they had created together and the new life growing inside her. Afterward, Teresa lay with her head on Kade's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and thought about how far they had both come. If someone had told her 7 years ago when she was boarding that stagecoach in Kingman that she would end up married to a mountain man with a house full of children and more happiness than she had ever dreamed possible, she would have thought them mad. But life had a way of surprising you, of taking you down paths you never expected and leading you to exactly where you were meant to be. The new baby, another daughter they named Rose, arrived in April amid a riot of wildflowers that carpeted the mountain meadows. She was tiny and perfect, with her mother's dark hair and her father's strong features, and the whole family fell in love with her instantly. James, Emma, and Samuel took turns helping care for their baby sister, and the cabin rang with laughter and life. As the years passed, Teresa continued teaching, though she had cut back her hours to focus on her family. Her school had become one of the best in the territory, drawing students from surrounding settlements. Several of her former pupils had gone on to pursue higher education, and she took pride in knowing she had made a real difference in their lives. Kade expanded his land holdings and developed a reputation as one of the finest guides in Arizona territory. He took hunting parties into the high country, led prospectors to promising claims, and occasionally served as a scout for the army when they needed someone who knew the mountains. But he was always home for dinner, always there for his children, always the rock on which Teresa could lean. On their 10th anniversary, Kade took Teresa back to the place where they had first camped together, the sheltered basin with the spring and the twisted trees. It looked exactly as it had that night so long ago, timeless and peaceful. I wanted to bring you back here," Kade said as they sat by a fire, much like the one they had shared a decade earlier. "To the place where I first realized I was falling in love with you. I watched you that night, so brave and determined, despite being completely out of your element, and I thought, this is a woman worth knowing, worth loving." "I felt it too," Teresa admitted. "I tried to tell myself it was just gratitude, just the drama of the situation, but even then I knew it was more. You made me feel safe and seen, and I had not felt either of those things in so long." "We have built a good life," Kade said, taking her hand. "A life worth living. And it is all because a band of outlaws blocked a stagecoach pass, and I happened to be in the right place at the right time." "We make our own luck," Teresa said. "You chose to help that day when you could have ridden on. I chose to trust you when every rule of society said I should not, and we have been making choices together ever since, building something beautiful out of chance and courage." They stayed at the basin that night, just the two of them, leaving their children in Harriet's capable care. They made love under the stars, holding each other close, remembering who they had been when they first met, and marveling at who they had become. It was a perfect night, a perfect moment in a life full of such moments. Years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. James grew tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet competence and steady nature. He had his mother's love of learning, though, and at 16, he announced his intention to study law, wanting to bring justice and order to the growing territory. Teresa and Kade were proud of him, even though it meant he would leave for university in Denver. Emma proved to have her father's skill with wilderness living and her mother's fierce intelligence. She could track game as well as any man, ride like the wind, and quote Shakespeare while doing it. She announced at 15 that she had no intention of marrying young, that she wanted to see the world and have adventures first. Kade was horrified at the thought of his daughter running wild, but Teresa reminded him that Emma had inherited her parents' spirit, and trying to cage her would only make her rebel. Samuel, true to his early nature, became the family scholar. He read voraciously, studied everything he could get his hands on, and at 14 was already helping his mother teach at the school. He was gentle and kind, beloved by everyone who knew him, and Teresa saw in him the promise of something special. Rose, the baby, grew into a beautiful young girl with a gift for music. Kade had bought a fiddle from a traveling merchant, and Rose had taken to it like a duck to water. By the time she was 10, she could play anything by ear, and her music filled their home with joy. Through it all, Teresa and Kade remained the constant center, their love the foundation on which everything else was built. They had weathered storms and droughts, sickness and loss, the everyday challenges of raising a family in a still wild land. But they had done it together, supporting each other, loving each other, choosing each other every single day. One evening, when Kade was 52 and Teresa was 48, they sat on the porch of their mountain cabin watching their grandchildren play. James had married a good woman from Denver and brought her home to Cedar Springs, where he practiced law. They had 2 children and were expecting a third. Emma had finally settled down with a rancher from New Mexico, though she still disappeared into the wilderness regularly to indulge her wanderlust. Samuel was engaged to his childhood sweetheart, a quiet girl who shared his love of learning, and Rose, now 18, was being courted by several young men, though she had not yet decided on any of them. "We did good," Kade said, his voice rougher now, with age but still strong. His hair was more gray than dark now, and lines marked his face, but he was still the man Teresa had fallen in love with all those years ago, still strong and capable and utterly devoted to her. "We did," Teresa agreed, leaning against his shoulder. Her own hair was streaked with silver, and she wore glasses now for reading, but she felt more beautiful than she ever had in her youth, because she was loved so completely. "Do you remember that first night?" Kade asked, "when we camped in the mountains, and I watched you sleep and thought about how strange it was that a band of outlaws could lead to meeting someone so perfect?" "I remember," Teresa said. "I remember being terrified and exhilarated and feeling like my whole life was changing in ways I could not understand yet." "It was changing," Kade said. "We both were. We became who we were meant to be together." Teresa thought about the girl she had been, leaving Boston with a broken heart and desperate hopes. She thought about the man Kade had been, hiding in the mountains from pain and disappointment, and she thought about who they had become together. Partners, lovers, parents, grandparents, 2 people who had built a legacy of love that would continue long after they were gone. "I would not change a single thing," she said firmly. "Not one moment, not one choice. It was all perfect because it led us here, to this life, to this love." "Even the outlaws?" Kade teased. "Especially the outlaws," Teresa said with a laugh, "because without them, you might never have had a reason to help a frightened teacher on a stagecoach. We might have passed like ships in the night, never knowing what we could have been to each other." "Then I am grateful for those outlaws," Kade said, pulling her close and kissing the top of her head, "and for blocked mountain passes and hidden trails, and every twist of fate that brought you into my life. You are my greatest adventure, Teresa Norwood, my greatest blessing. And you are mine, Teresa whispered, holding him tight as the sun set over the mountains they both loved. Their grandchildren's laughter echoed through the clearing, and somewhere in the cabin behind them, Rose was playing her fiddle, a sweet melody that spoke of joy and home and love. This was what happiness looked like, Teresa thought. Not perfection, not ease, but a life built together with purpose and passion. It was messy and complicated and sometimes difficult, but it was real. It was theirs. And she would not trade it for all the refinement and wealth of Boston, for all the ease and comfort of a safer, more conventional life. She had taken a chance on a mountain man who had found a hidden trail and led her through to safety. But in doing so, she had found so much more than safety. She had found her home, her heart, her reason for being. She had found love in its truest, deepest form, and it had transformed her entire world. As the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first night together so many years ago, Teresa silently thanked whatever forces of fate or chance had brought her to that stagecoach on that particular day. She thanked the outlaws who had blocked the pass, terrifying though they had been. She thanked the mountains for harboring a man who would become her everything, and she thanked life itself for being so much more generous and unexpected and wonderful than she had ever dared to dream. This was her story, their story, a tale of courage and trust and love conquering fear. It had started with danger and uncertainty, but it had bloomed into something beautiful, something lasting, something that would echo through generations to come. And as Kade's arms tightened around her and their grandchildren's laughter filled the mountain air, Teresa Norwood smiled and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly who she was meant to be with, living exactly the life she was meant to live. The end had become the beginning, and the beginning had led to more happiness than she had ever thought possible. In choosing to trust a stranger on a mountain trail, she had chosen everything that mattered. She had chosen love.